What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards, old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. This week on Not Your Average Meta, we have another Pauper EDH game on deck. In Pauper EDH, a deck consists of one uncommon creature you use as your commander, while the rest of your deck is constructed with only 99 commons. Your life total also starts at 30 instead of 40, and your commander damage is reduced from 21 damage to 16. First up this week, we have Martin, the werewolf guy, playing his Oops All Flyers deck, which is led by Kangee, Warden. This is an all Flyers tribal deck that looks to over his opponents by taking to the skies. Then we have Jacob playing his mono green elf ball deck, being led by Imperious Perfect. This is your classic all-elf strategy where Jacob is looking to outvalue his opponents with a ton of elf shenanigans. Next we have Fallgirl playing his Azorius Affinity artifact deck, being led by Ethersworn Sphinx. This is an all-artifact deck where he looks to take advantage of his commander's affinity ability in order to cast her cheap and cascade into extra value. Finally we have Justin playing Fogg's Rakdos Vampire tribal deck, being led by Vampire Socialite. This deck is looking to ping his opponents in order to go wide with buffed up vampires for the win. Now that we're fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Justin plays a Swamp, then pays 1 for a Pulse Tracker. Martin draws, plays a Plains, and passes. Jacob draws and plays a tapped Gingerbread Cabin before also passing. Fogg draws and plays a Plains before paying 1 for a Mere Scrappling. Justin draws and plays a Mountain for a turn. He then goes to combat swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob for 1 damage, while having each opponent lose 1 life on attack. Justin then pays 2 to cast his commander, putting a +1/+1 counter on his tracker. Martin draws and plays an island for turn before paying 2 for Concordia Pegasus. Jacob draws and plays a forest for turn before paying 2 for a Thorn-Wheeled Archer. Fogg draws and plays an island for turn. He then pays 2 for a Mere Seer and passes. Justin draws for turn and then plays a Swamp. He then goes to combat swinging at Martin, each opponent then loses a life and Martin blocks. Justin then casts a Vampire Interloper who enters with a +1/+1 counter and he passes. Martin draws for turn, then plays an island and passes. Jacob draws for turn, then cycles a card to draw a card and passes turn. Fogg draws for turn, then plays another island. He then pays 2 for a Peerless Mirror and then another 1 for Preordain, scrying 2 and drawing a card. Justin draws for turn and then plays a Swamp. He then goes to combat swinging at Fogg, who doesn't block, and each opponent then loses a life. Justin then pays to cast a Vermin Gorger, a Vampire Noble, and a Viscera, who all enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. Martin draws and plays a Plains for turn before tapping out to cast a Courier Griffin. Jacob draws for turn and passes. Fogg draws a turn that pays 3 to cast a Commander Sphere and a Frogmite for free before passing. Justin draws a turn, then goes to combat swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob. Each opponent then loses a life. Jacob then blocks with his elf. Before damage is dealt, Jacob casts Tameo Safekeeping in order to save his elf and gain 2 life. Pulse Tracker then dies and Justin casts Grave Purge to return the Pulse Tracker to the top of his library before he draws it again. Martin draws a turn and plays an island before passing turn. Jacob draws a turn and then pays 1 for a Savage Swipe, choosing to have his elf fight Justin's commander. This then sends his commander to the command zone. Fogg draws a turn and then taps his commander sphere to float white mana, before sacking his sphere in order to draw a card. He then plays another island as his land for turn, before tapping out to cast his commander, who cascades when she enters the battlefield. Fogg then cascades into a Silver Raven, who has him scrying on ETB, and he passes turn. Justin draws for turn and plays another mountain. He then pays 1 to recast Pulse Tracker before going to combat and swing his Interloper Jacob. Jacob blocks with his Death Touch Elf, sending them both to the graveyard. On his end step, Martin flashes in a Living Tempest. Martin draws for turn and then plays the Plains before going to combat, swinging his Pegasus at Justin for 1 damage. He then taps out for a Shoreline Ranger and passes. Jacob draws and pays 2 to cast a Priest of Titania and passes. Fogg draws for turn and then pays 2 for a Courier's Capsule, and then pays another 2 and 2 life to cast a Spine Thopter. Fogg then goes to combat and swings his commander Jacob for 4 commander damage. On his end step, Justin pays 2 to cast Cast Down, killing Jacob's Priest of Titania. Jacob draws a turn and then pays 2 for a Blood Petal Celebrant before going to combat, swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob while each opponent loses a life on attack. Martin draws a turn and then goes to combat, swinging his Ranger and Pegasus at Justin for 5 damage and then passes his turn. Jacob draws a turn and then pays 2 to cast a Crashing Drawbridge. Fog draws and plays a Command Tower as his land for turn. He then pays 4 to cast a Fairy Mechanist. Fog then looks at the top 3 cards of his library when he enters and puts an artifact into his hand, bottoming the rest. Fog then goes to combat, swinging his commander at Martin, who responds by tapping out to cast Capsize in order to bounce him back to his hand. Fog then responds to the Blacksmith skill, which then has Martin taking 6 commander damage. On his end step, Justin uses his Neo Knight to have each opponent lose a life while he gains a life. Justin draws a turn, then goes to combat, swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob. Each opponent then loses life, and Jacob blocks with his bridge. Martin draws and plays an island for turn. He then goes to combat and swings his Ranger and Tempest at Justin for 5 more damage. Martin then pays 5 to cast his commander, Kangee. Jacob draws a turn and then passes again. Fog draws a turn and then plays another Plains. He then pays 2 to sacrifice his capsule to draw 2 cards. Fog then goes to combat, swinging his commander at Martin again, who blocks with his Pegasus. Fog then pays 2 for Parcel Mirror and another 2 for Vidalcan Outlander. On his end step, Justin uses his Neo Knot to have each opponent lose a life while he gains a life. Justin draws a turn and then goes to combat, swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob. Each opponent then loses a life, and Jacob blocks with his bridge. He then taps 4 to recast his commander, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of his vampires. Justin then casts a Viridian Longbow and passes. Martin draws a turn and then goes to combat, swinging his Ranger at Fog and the rest of his team at Justin. Fog blocks with the Stopter while Justin takes all the damage, going to 6 life. Martin then casts a Syndicate Messenger as well as a Sunmane Pegasus. Jacob draws again and then passes turn. Fog draws a turn and plays an island. He then pays 2 to sack his mirror to draw a card. Fog then pays 5 for Glass Dusk Hulk and then goes to combat, swinging his Vidalcan at Justin for some reason, who blocks and kills him. Justin draws a turn and then pays 4 to cast Bleed Dry to send Kangee back to Martin's command zone. He then casts Strike It Rich to create a treasure token. Justin then goes to combat, swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob. Each opponent then loses a life, and Jacob blocks with his bridge. Martin draws and then goes straight to combat, swinging his Tempest and Ranger at Justin, who responds by using his Vermin Gorger to sack his Neo Knot in order to make each opponent lose 2 life while he gains 2 life. Justin then survives the attack, and Martin pays to recast his commander. Jacob draws and finally plays a 3rd land for turn. He then taps out, and he victoriously casts his commander, Imperious Perfect. Fog draws for turn and then pays 3 for a Chrome Courier, revealing the top 2 cards of his library. He then puts an artifact into his hand and then gains 3 life while putting the other into his graveyard. His Hulk then gets +1/+1 for turn before he casts a Wayfarer's Bauble, giving the Hulk an additional +1/+1. He then swings his Hulk at Martin as commander Jacob, who doesn't block. Fog then casts a Corridor Monitor, which untaps his commander. Justin draws and plays a Swamp for turn. He then goes to combat, swinging his Pulse Tracker Jacob and a Celebrant at Martin. Each opponent then loses a life, and Jacob blocks with his bridge, while Martin blocks with Kangee. The Celebrant dies and he gets a blood token. Justin sacks a blood token to discard and draw a card. He then casts Balatrude Spy, targeting Jacob, making him mill till he hits a land. Martin draws a turn, then goes to combat, swinging his Commander and Pegasus at Jacob, while he swings his Ranger and Tempest at Justin. Justin then blocks the Tempest with his Spy, while he sacks his Viscera's here to his Gorger, making each opponent lose 2 life while he gains 2 life. Jacob and Justin then both get taken out of the game, and Martin pays 4 to cast a Griffin Protector. Fogg draws a turn and then pays 2 to cast an Implement of Examination. Giving his Hulk +1/+1 until end of turn. He then pays to sack his Implement, drawing 2 more cards. Fogg then plays a Seed of the Synod, giving his Hulk an additional +1/+1. He then pays 1 to cast Opt, scrying 1 to the bottom of his library before drawing a card. Fogg then casts Machinate, looking at his top 12 cards, putting 1 into his hand and the rest at the bottom of his library. He then goes to combat, swinging his Hulk at Martin while sacking his Mirror to add an additional +1/+1 counter to his Hulk, who deals 6 damage. Martin draws a turn, then pays 3 to cast a Frost Trickster, which keeps Fogg's Hulk tapped until his next turn. He then casts a Wingsteed Rider and goes to combat, swinging all his creatures at Fogg. Fogg then blocks with his Commander, his Courier, his Raven, his Mechanist, before taking the rest of the damage, going to 6 life. Fogg draws and then plays an island for turn before tapping enough to recast his Commander, who cascades when she enters. He then cascades into an Arcane Signet. Fogg then pays to cast a Dramatic Rescue to return his Commander to his hand and gain 2 life. He then recasts his Commander and cascades a second time, hitting a Gitaxian Probe. Fogg then looks at Martin's hand and draws a card. He then casts a discounted Thoughtcast, trying to find an answer to Martin's flyers. Fogg then goes to combat and swings his Mirror at Martin for 1 damage and finally passes. Martin draws a turn and then goes to combat, swinging all out at Fogg for the win. The big winner of today's game is Martin, the werewolf guy. Normally we'd have a post-game interview, but since we forgot to conduct one for this game, we're going with the old school game MVP. The MVP for this week is literally just a creature ability to fly. Flyers are a very strong strategy in this format, and with the lack of board wipes at the Pauper level, it's hard to control a mass army of flying creatures. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.